The last snow had melted from the hills when the black hare returned to Elk Hollow. The villagers, pale and tight-lipped, said nothing as it loped along the edge of the woods. Its eyes were too round, its fur too matted, as if it drank in the light rather than reflected it. No one hunted it, no child tried to chase it, and even the dogs howled when it passed. For 3 nights it circled the old church on the hill, the one abandoned since the ground split open beneath its altar. By Easter Sunday, the daffodils bloomed in twisted curls. The sun never quite pierced the haze, and the eggs began to appear. They were not laid nor painted, they simply were, clustered in hollows left in doorways and nestled among the roots of ancient trees. Shells of bone white and dull grey, slick to the touch and faintly warm. They pulsed sometimes, softly as if dreaming. No one claimed them, and no one dared destroy them. Except Jonah Bell. Jonah had returned to Elk Hollow after 15 years in the city, brought back by his mother's funeral and the cold estate left behind. He did not believe in omens, or the old traditions, or the hollow, rattling things the townsfolk half whispered and never quite finished saying. But he remembered the hare. It had come once before, when he was 8, and that spring the creek ran black, and the twins from the Miller family were found inside the well, eyes open, mouths full of feathers. Still, Jonah watched the hare that Easter morning. He stood atop the mossy stone wall in his backyard, framed in the dead trees, and staring. Unmoving, unblinking, at his feet lay a single egg, slick and black as oil. He stepped forward, barefoot, and crushed it beneath his heel. The sound it made was wrong. Not the crack of an eggshell, but the wet, gelatinous pop of something trying not to die. And from that moment on, something began to wake. That night, Jonah dreamed of a field lit by no sun. Eggs covered the earth, rolling in every direction, their shells cracked and weeping light. A sky of meat stretched overhead, and from it dangled veils of tendon and breath. Something stirred beneath the ground, huge and slow, its heart beat loud enough to shift the air in his lungs. He awoke, choking on yolk. It spilled from his mouth, grey and gelatinous, peppered with twitching filaments like root hairs. His throat burned, his eyes streamed, the taste lingered like rust and seawater. In the mirror, he saw one of the veins in his eye was no longer red, but dark green and pulsing. The town was quiet the next day. Too quiet. Not in the cliched way of horror novels or ghost stories, but with a silence of resignation. A kind of hush that meant everyone knew something and no longer spoke of it aloud. Jonah walked to the centre of the village. The egg was gone, and so was the hare. But on every door, including his own, a mark had been smeared in ash. A broken circle, a spiral inside it, and a single line descending like a tail. The children were gone, and no one searched. By the 3rd night, Jonah stopped dreaming. Or rather, he could no longer wake. His sleep became a tunnel, long, humid, filled with sounds like flesh tearing and organs rearranging. His limbs twitched of their own accord. His fingernails yellowed. The mark appeared on his shoulder, faint at first, like heat rash. By morning, it had deepened, raw and scabbed, like something branded him from the inside out. That was when he remembered the old stories. Not the nursery rhymes, but the real ones, whispered by his grandmother when the power flickered and the hares danced under the moon. of the Hollow One. A thing not born, but grown. Not god, not beast, but a will that wore flesh like a costume and laid its memory into generations like seeds. It came at Easter, not because of resurrection, but because we made a mistake in thinking resurrection was ours to claim. The eggs weren't symbols, they were egresses, containers, wombs, and something inside them remembered him. Jonah tried to leave. He packed the car, drove toward the bridge that led out of Elk Hollow. But halfway across, the road fractured. Not crumbled, but fractured. Like glass beneath a pressure too vast to name. The trees leaned forward, the sky drooped, birds spiraled in reverse, and at the edge of his vision, always just behind him, he saw the hare. Watching. He turned back, but there was nowhere else to go. The townspeople had gathered at the church. Its roof had caved in years ago, but the walls remained. So did the altar, splintered and blackened, with veins of something pulsing just beneath the stone. Jonah stood apart, but no one stopped him. The villagers carried the eggs, some broken, some still whole, and placed them on the altar in silence. Then the priest, an old man with one eye and no tongue, raised his hands. The wind died. From the ground a sound rose, not music, but the memory of music. Dissonant, like dozens of choirs humming through teeth. The earth trembled. A crack widened at the altar's base. It opened not into depth, but into hollowness. A space without geometry, a void that dripped light. And something began to crawl free. Not quickly, not fully, but just enough. Jonah screamed. No words, just a scream of recognition. He felt the same shape rise in him. That same pulse that lived in the yolk he had vomited, that now pulsed beneath his ribs. He was not an intruder. He was not a witness. He was a vessel. The villagers turned to him, weeping black tears. One by one they bowed, not to him, but to what stirred inside him. And as the altar cracked and the sky split, Jonah fell to his knees, his spine arched back and his mouth unhinged, not wide but wrong, a second jaw folding open, and from it emerged not sound, but a name. One not meant for throats, only for silence. One that echoed through the fields, the trees, the eggs. And they answered. Across Elk Hollow, every egg pulsed once, then split. From each, a figure crawled forth, not identical, not human, but related to Jonah in shape and intention. Each bore his mark, each looked at him with the same green-veined eyes. They had no language, because they needed none. Jonah stood. He was not alone. He had never been alone. For this was the Easter of the hollowing, not of resurrection, but of replication. A seed had returned to its soil, and the world again would bloom. In the soot-drenched borough of Oster's Rise, where the fog clung to chimneys like ghost moss and the zeppelins wheeled above like vultures made of iron and silk, there stood an old clockwork bell tower that no longer rang. It loomed above the district like a monument to some forgotten age, its brass spine corroded, its cogs rusted and clogged with black soot and bird bones. Children were forbidden from playing near it, not because it was dangerous, but because of what had happened the last time that bell had chimed. That Easter Sunday, 20 years past, had begun with sunlight and ended in ash. The fog came thicker than ever that evening, curling through the alleys like breath from a corpse. When the bell struck midnight, though no one had wound the tower since the collapse, they appeared. Not demons, not angels, just machines. Carved in the rough shape of man, but filled with something else, something that watched from behind crystal eyes. They walked only a few blocks, left scorch marks and melted shoes in their wake, then vanished. In their place, 21 townsfolk fused together in a lattice of flesh and copper, humming softly beneath the collapsed altar of St. Oster's church. After that, the tower was sealed, clergy abandoned. The town carried on as it always had, pistons pounding, gears screaming and engines spitting. Progress demanded sacrifice, and Easter, it seemed, demanded mystery. But not for Elias Gant. Elias was a gearwright's apprentice, orphaned by the collapse, yet raised on soot and spite. He lived in the shadows of the old rail pipes and broken sky bridges, nursing a quiet obsession, the bell. Not for faith, not for vengeance, but because it had rung, and no one had ever explained quite how. On the eve of Easter, Elias creeped into the underguts of the tower. He carried a lantern filled with the radium sputter gas and a toolkit lined with his master's abandoned inventions. Bone-handled spanners, bronze-forked electromagnets, and a screwdriver that sang when held too tightly. The door to the tower was sealed with an iron plate bolted in 6 places, yet now it opened with no resistance. Within, the air was stale but warm. The gears on the walls shivered gently as if breathing in their sleep. Brass pipes lined the stairwell, curving like vertebrae into the heights above. As he climbed, his light caught glimpses of markings, scratches on the walls. Symbols, spirals, not carved by hand or chisel, but by repeated motion, repeated worship. Elias's breath clouded the air in shades of green. He passed the 2nd floor, where the monks had once lived. Their dormitories were still intact, still made absurdly with lace drapery and fine rosewood desks. But the windows were gone, and the wallpaper peeled like scorched skin. In the corner of one room sat a porcelain rabbit, its face painted with a smile too wide, one ear snapped off. The room smelled like sweet oil and rot. Elias ascended. At the belfry, Elias expected dust. He expected silence, but instead, he found movement. The gears still turned, and not fast but steadily, as if responding to some invisible weight or command. The bell, massive and greened with age, hung above it all like an eye half closed, and beneath it, a dais. And yet beneath that, something buried. He stepped forward, drawn by the sound. Not a ring or a toll, but a pulse. Like a heart encased in bronze. The floor beneath him trembled. The bell moved, once, just once, not with force, but with intention. Elias fell. The floor split inward, a mouth of clockwork teeth and velvet steam. He dropped into darkness, landed on something that breathed. No, not breathed. Hissed. Like steam escaping. Like a voice run through fluted metal. He stood slowly. His lantern had shattered, but the chamber glowed, dimly from seams in the floor, and in the walls, and in the ceiling. It was not a room, it was a lung. Pistons flexed in the corners, slow and rhythmic. Valves pulsed open and shut. Above him, the bell's base rotated like a slow eye, and in the centre, rising from a pit of coiled cabling and wax-sealed tendons, stood a figure. Human, at least at first glance, but too tall, too narrow. His fingers were too many. Its robe was made not of cloth, but braided wires and tubes. Its face, a mask of gold leaf over porcelain, smiled eternally. And behind its back, it held a chain. Elias backed away. The chain unravelled. At its end was not a hook, not a blade, but a bell clapper. The priest machine, if that's what it was, raised the clapper to the underside of the bell, and Elias screamed. The sound it made was not sound. It was a reversal, as if silence itself had been struck. The air inverted, the colour drained from the walls. Elias felt his skin tighten, his eyes expand, and then he saw time. The Easter of the first ringing, the ones who came, the sacrifice. The machinery beneath the altar, ancient, non-human, and divined by accident. He saw engineers in robes, rabbits painted with ash. Eggs, yes, but not for birth, for containment. And it was then he saw the god. Not a person, not a beast, but a mechanism so vast it folded dimensions to fit. Its name was not a word, but a pattern. Its body a loop of repeating functions. Its consciousness housed in bells and in signals, in ritualized sound. And Elias had triggered it again. He awoke lying on the dais. The tower was silent, but he was not alone. Around him stood others, dozens. Some wore robes, some wore soot-covered goggles, some were even children. Yet all of them were Elias. Versions, refractions, possible selves fractured across the gears of causality. The bell had split him, multiplied him, spread him like code across the timeline. The priest machine stood among them, nodding slowly. Elias tried to scream. Instead, he heard a chime. Inside his ribs. The bell was within him now. A tiny mechanism, a divine seed. By morning, the fog had returned. The zeppelin stalled overhead, and the water ran cold. And in the square outside the bell tower, the people of Oster's rise had gathered, not with faith, but with knowing. One by one, they knelt. As Elias stepped from the tower, now clad in porcelain and wire, a new bell formed in the clouds above, its tone hollow, radiant, alive. The others followed, not citizens, not worshippers, just Eliases. Each a variation, each a chime, each a signal to the god machine that Easter had indeed come again, and the world was once more ready to be rewound. There's just something captivating about a dead mole. You know what I'm talking about, right? You've seen them in YouTube videos. Hell, at this point in time and at this point in the country, you've probably got at least one in your city. Those malls are still open to the public, still technically operational, but nearly completely devoid of all signs of life. The corridors are mostly dim. Lonely synthetic plants stand alone and cast dark, twisted shadows over tiled floors and dried-up wishing fountains. You don't really see many employees, no security guards, no management, no one keeping an eye on things. Maybe something like only 3 stores out of 30 are still open, the last survivors of some apocalyptic event. Looking at these places and being inside one gives you an incredibly elegiac feeling. Well, it gives me one anyway. I can't shake the aura that something had died. Something that used to be here and isn't anymore. Something is gone. Not just the businesses and people though, but something deeper. More. Your childhood, the good times, a sense of hope. It's a little dramatic, I know, but I just remember being a kid, going to the mall with our dad was an event, the toy shops, the food court, and all the sounds and sights. One mall we went to sometimes growing up even had a carousel, and it was like being in some endless world. Going to those same places that were once so vibrant and full of life, and seeing nothing but shuttered shops, a carousel that clearly hadn't run in years, and a husk, it just hurts. The simpler times are gone and they're not coming back. And now they're replaced with something cold and empty. Only, and I learned this the hard way, in the worst way, sometimes it's not so cold, not so lifeless, not so empty. Something can take shape in those places. Wrong and horrible and monstrous aren't even the words for it. Our words can't do it justice. It doesn't belong. Kyle, I'm so sorry. Nothing I can do or say or write will ever fix it. But every time I feel that itch on the empty space where my right arm used to be, where my phantom limb sears with hot pain, I think of you. And maybe telling the story will help in some way. Going to explore the mall had been my idea. Nothing much had been going on that day. Kyle and I were just loafing around in my dorm playing fighting games, and Kyle, he came to visit all the time back then. My brother and I had always been close, growing up with a turbulent home situation, fumbling through adolescence and our early teen years with the dances and boyfriends and girlfriends and underage drinking and all the wild shit kids get into. We were the one constant in each other's lives. It wasn't something that was going to change just because I was going to school 2 hours away from our hometown, where Kyle still lived with our mum. Kyle was about to graduate, and he'd saved up some money from his part-time movie theatre job to buy a piece of shit used car. Religiously, Kyle would drive that car from Mum's ranch in Vernon all the way to the university nearly every weekend. There was only a 3-year age difference between us, and so I could relate to Kyle's life as someone who was about to enter the cold and unforgiving system of higher education. I had been right there with him at Vernon High only a few years prior. We'd gone to a party the previous night. I was pretty sure Kyle had hooked up with my roommate Tammy, and it skeezed me a little. Tammy was a cool enough person, and we had become pretty good friends in our time living together. I wasn't about to criticize or try to control whose pants my friends or my brother got into. But as Tammy lay silently barricaded in her room, ostensibly sleeping off the events of the previous night, I pondered whether a fling between the two of them had the potential to complicate two important relationships in my life. I was nursing a bit of a hangover, and watching the digital forms of King and Paul Phoenix punch each other in the head had started to make my eyes hurt. I put the controller down. "Kyle," I said, "this is boring. I'm bored." He rolled his eyes. "You always say that when you're losing." He was right. I did always say that when I was losing. "Well, yeah, you're right, you win. I'm a loser and it's boring." He shrugged and set his controller down as well. "I could go for some food." He phrased the statement more like a question. "Nah. We devoured a greasy hangover breakfast not 2 hours ago." Kyle shrugged again, apparently now out of ideas. I don't know what made me think of it. I'd had a mild fascination with a YouTube channel that catalogued dead malls and had explored one a few states over on a trip with some friends one holiday break my first year of school. It was like I said earlier, there was something so fascinating and simultaneously powerful and mournful about these places. Even still, I couldn't tell you what caused me to make the suggestion that day. I think about it a lot. An unhealthy amount. How different things would be if I hadn't blurted it out. "Hey," I sat upright from my lounging position on the sofa. What about that old mall Dad used to take us to all the time? Kyle raised an eyebrow. You remember, it was like just outside of town. On our weekends with him, we'd always go up there at least once. Granite Path Mall. Kyle chuckled. God, Joe, we haven't been there since I was 10? 11? Right when Dad stopped coming around. I nodded. I know. But I've driven by it a few times, Going into town on the holidays or to visit Mum or whatever. Place looks almost completely bombed out. I think most of the stores in there are shut down. It's quite a dead mall. Kyle rolled his eyes again. Oh yeah, like the YouTube videos, I confirmed. And you want to go there? You want to drive an hour and a half just to go walk around inside a mall with no open stores? We're already doing nothing. I tossed a throw pillow at him. Well, isn't there something kind of interesting about going to this place that used to be so alive and now it's not? And that Chinese place where we used to always eat? We can take some cool pics and I'll drive. Kyle laughed derisively. Interesting or depressing? Oh yeah, right. I forgot those two words are interchangeable in Josephine's world. Before I could retort, the sound of Tammy's bedroom door swinging open interrupted our conversation. My friend stumbled out of her room, her hair a rat's nest, and looking how most college kids look after too much fun. Kyle's face instantly went bright red as Tammy dismissively and quickly waved one hand and grunted at us, making her way into the kitchen for a glass of water. I laughed and Kyle chuckled nervously. Hey Tammy, I called to her. Wanna go explore a dead mall? She held one finger up to me and guzzled the water, streams running from the corners of her mouth down to her chin. Tammy let out a satisfied breath as she finished her drink, finally answering. Sure, though can we stop for a cubic litre of coffee on the way? Turning back to face Kyle, I raised my eyebrows and gestured toward Tammy. So? Kyle relented, throwing his hands up. Alright. Maybe it'll be cool. Pete's sitting around all day kicking your ass at Tekken. I grinned and Tammy sat down on the couch next to me. I noticed she and my brother exchanged a look that they thought was secret, a small smile passing between them. Tammy's green eyes lit up as she turned away and sipped her drink. Looking back on that moment, I can't imagine how I ever worried about whatever the two of them were getting into. It was so beautiful and pure and happy. One of the last moments like that, really. An endless wave of possibilities and outcomes fractured out from that moment, kind of like the way the glass spiderwebs on a shattered windshield. All the different worlds and timelines born from that moment, and I was stuck in this one, the one where Tammy and Kyle were gone. Not 2 hours later, I was bringing my car to a stop in the car park of Granite Path Mall. It was an easy drive. The three of us goofed off and bullshitted the entire time, carefree and careless. So you guys used to shop here when you were kids? Tammy asked as she exited my Sentra and closed the passenger door and taken a big sip of her extra large iced coffee. The tone of her voice was unimpressed and I didn't blame her. Granite Path Mall was looking even more run down than I expected. The facade of the building was nearly crumbling, with some of the glass panelling at the entrance gone and now replaced with large boards of wood. There weren't even any cars throughout the vast parking lot that I could see. Well, not where we'd parked anyway. The mall truly looked desolate, haunted even. At the time though, this thought filled me with excitement. The place was looking even more interesting than I could have ever hoped for. Kyle answered Tammy before I could. Yeah, Dad used to bring us here all the time on his weekends. We grew up in the small town nearby, and when our parents split up, he lived in an apartment complex 10 minutes from the mall. Tammy nodded. She kept her eyes locked on the crumbling structure before us. It looks abandoned, she finally observed. I laughed. Hey, Carla and I haven't actually been inside in years. It could be abandoned for all we know. Yeah, I'm sure this place was a ton of fun back in the day, Tammy quipped. Immediately upon entering the mall, it was exactly what I'd wanted it to be. The 90s kitsch tiled floor alternated pink and green. Dim lights just barely illuminated the halls filled with empty storefronts, lacking signs and caged with long ago locked and abandoned metal gates. I started taking pictures with my phone right away, trying to get a perfect angle of the waterless fountain that sat in the mall's center court. Light poured over it from the sky dome above, and the inside was cracked and filthy. Tammy and Kyle were peering into one of the many darkened storefronts, trying to determine what place of business the empty shop had once been. In the distance, down the wing of the mall to my right, there were a few shops that looked to still be open, though from here I couldn't quite make out what they were. I wondered if any of the stores that Kyle and I used to love still existed all these years later. I turned to the faded mall directory that stood next to the fountain, hoping to get an idea of how the layout of the Granite Path Mall had changed since I was last skulking around in here as an angsty 14-year-old. A small part of me kind of hoped that we could still get that Chinese food. Something else caught my attention though. A smaller sign now stood in front of the directory. My eyes widened as Tammy and Kyle sauntered over to me, giggling. "Look at this!" I exclaimed, thrusting a finger at the small sign. Kyle and Tammy both leaned down to read the bright yellow words and bursting of a pink background. It was a simple sign really, loud and attention-grabbing, the kind of thing that would draw a little kid's eye. The face of a smiling cartoon rabbit with baby blue fur stared wide-eyed and grinning open mouth next to the text, the corners of the poster adorned with colourful eggs. "Meet the Easter Bunny, $5, the sign exclaimed. And in smaller text, the location. In Wing D, near the food court. As opposed to literally everything else about the decrepit shopping centre, the sign was clearly new. As in, it had obviously been put up recently as an ad for a currently ongoing event at the mall. "Okay, we have to go do this immediately," I said. Tammy cackled. "Dude," Kyle smirked as he spoke. "That's so weird. Why would they even bother having something like this here?" He looked around the empty building and gestured. "Not like there's any kids around." I punched his shoulder. "Why are you questioning such a terrific thing? Just think of the great pictures we're going to get. Some guy in a raggedy-ass bunny suit, alone on a cheap Easter backdrop in this post-apocalyptic mall. Look, we were going to go to the food court anyway." Kyle shook his head, laughing. Tammy piped up. "Well, I for one think it's a fucking great idea. And honestly, this trip could be worth it just for these pictures." "Okay, well..." I thrust my arms in front of me, commanding Tammy and Kyle to get a move on. The once over I'd given the directory told me we'd need to head left from the fountain for Wing D. On our way to the Easter Bunny, I snapped a few more pictures of shuttered storefronts and faded tiles. The mall seemed mostly deserted that day, other than the employees who milled about in the meagre few open shops. It made total sense. What would anyone be coming here to shop for? Not this, I thought as we passed a strange and themeless antique store, which really looked to be full of nothing but big pallets of cluttered junk. Its gate was raised though, so it was open. The sign above had either burned out or whoever was working didn't care enough to turn it on. Picton's pallet sales. Far in the back of the store, visible through the entrance, sat behind a till in the dim lights, their form barely registering from this distance. If that was what was left standing around here, it was no wonder the shoppers weren't showing up in droves. This place was beyond life support. Anyone still shopping here was merely picking the last bits of decaying meat off of dry, aging bones. As we passed the food court, I grabbed Kyle's arm. "Hey!" I exclaimed. "Quick, let's look and see if that Chinese place is still open." Tammy laughed. "Even if it is," Kyle said as I dragged him forward, "do you really trust any of the food in here not to kill us?" I replied with dead seriousness. "You know, I think I'll risk it for that General Tso's and fried rice combo." The food court in the Granite Path Mall was smaller than I remembered. It didn't take us long for us to make a complete inventory of the new offerings that sat before the uncleaned and overturned metal tables. Nothing in the food court was open. No Chinese food, no pizza, nothing. I sighed. Well, that sucks. When we were little, I sometimes looked forward to this damn food court more than anything else in the mall. Wait, it was good? Tammy asked. Oh, I don't even really think it matters, to be honest, Kyle responded before I had the chance. It's just the memory, right? What the food and everything in here represented. Like, maybe it's better that you couldn't try it now, Joe, in a way. I considered what he said for a moment. Yeah, I really wanted that chicken. Tammy chuckled and Kyle rolled his eyes, and only a few feet down the corridor, I saw our destination. In the middle of a large open space on the floor, a patch of green astroturf had been laid over the cracked tiles. Painted Easter eggs of all different colours and patterns were stacked and strewn about. Some large and some small, they speckled the floor of the photo set. Behind the patch of artificial grass stood a large cloth backdrop and painted with a bright blue sky. In front of the false sky, behind a small metal fence and seated in a ghost white wicker chair, was the Easter Bunny. The costume honestly wasn't as ragged as I expected. The bright blue fur was clean and smooth, not dirty or patchy. His giant ears pointed toward the ceiling, one bent forward slightly at the very top, and he wore neon yellow overalls covered with green polka dots, whilst a patch in the centre was emblazoned with the initials EB. Two giant buck teeth protruded from the bunny's furry white muzzle, and from which giant whiskers shot off in both directions. The only thing about the costume that looked a little off was its eyes. The pupils of the giant glass orbs were each turned to stare in opposite directions. The Easter Bunny sat cross-legged. There was a large basket filled to the brim with plastic Easter eggs in his lap, gloved hands folded and looking straight ahead. Straight at us. Overall, it was actually a pretty cute, if overly dumb looking bunny. I turned to Kyle and Tammy and smiled wide. This is even better than I expected, I said. And these are going to be awesome fucking pictures. Which one of us is going to sit on his lap first? Tammy asked. We all stared at each other and she touched Kyle's shoulder. How about you, Kyle? Your sister can take some great pics to show your mum. Kyle laughed bashfully, his cheeks reddening slightly when Tammy's hand grazed his arm. All right, he relented. We approached the bunny on his wicker throne. Kyle gave an awkward half wave. Happy Easter, Tammy exclaimed, throwing her arms over her head. We're here for pictures. I stifled a chuckle. Tammy was the type of person who relished in being obnoxious for the sake of comedy. The man in the costume didn't speak, didn't acknowledge us at all. He just continued staring, head facing forward and eyes going in polar opposite directions. I looked at Tammy, then at Kyle, raising an eyebrow quizzically. Hey, I finally spoke. Dude, can we get a picture? Never turning his head to actually face us, the Easter Bunny simply nodded in response to my question. Hey, wait, Kyle said. Isn't there supposed to be like an actual photographer? You know, someone to take good pictures of kids and stuff sitting on this guy's lap? I shrugged. Maybe they don't have payroll for that. I mean, everyone has a camera on their phone nowadays. Well, how do we pay? Kyle was right about that. There didn't seem to be a money pouch or another employee or anyone around to collect or process the $5 fee. The Easter Bunny suddenly stirred, and in response to Kyle's question, lifted a gloved hand and pointing down next to his chair. I saw that he was indicating a cheap dollar store grade bucket. It was faded pink and made of thin plastic, and a white piece of paper marked donations had been crudely taped across the front. Well, there you go, I said. I took a $5 bill out of my wallet and thrust it at Kyle. Pay the bunny and take a seat. Kyle shook his head, but accepted the money and took a step toward the Easter Bunny. You sure I'm not too heavy to sit on your lap, dude? Kyle said, laughing tensely. In response, the bunny simply patted his polka-dotted thigh inviting Kyle to sit. Tammy guffawed, and I grinned as I raised my phone to snap the picture. Kyle dropped the money in the bucket and tentatively lowered himself onto the bunny's lap, wincing as if he were in pain. Once seated, he turned to the camera and gave a comically exaggerated and clearly uncomfortable smile. As I took the photo, the bunny suddenly leaned his masked face toward Kyle's ear, so close that his plastic teeth grazed my brother's face. I frowned, and Kyle's eyes widened before he leapt to his feet, stumbling over the set and kicking a plastic egg. "What the hell, man?" Kyle yelled at the bunny. The Easter bunny had returned to sitting statue still and merely stared at Kyle in response. "What happened?" I asked, walking over to meet Kyle where he now stood back against the wall. He turned to face me, his eyes still wide. Wide with fear, I quickly realized. He whispered something to me, Kyle said. I frowned again. But what did he say? Kyle looked toward the floor and ran a hand down his face. My brother took a deep breath before speaking. He said, "I used to watch you all the time, when you were a little boy, from my special place between the walls." I looked at Kyle incredulously. He wasn't kidding. I knew when my brother was trying to play a joke. He was terrible at it, but the guy in the costume had clearly said something weird. I turned and scowled at the Easter bunny, the photo display now behind us, but the man had returned to his previous zen-like position. Maybe he was just messing with you, Tammy reasoned. She had sauntered over to the spot where we now stood and had heard Kyle's strange explanation too. Tammy shrugged. You know, just wanting to screw with some kids who were taking the piss out of his photo shoot. Joe, Kyle looked hard into my eyes. Let's go home. Please, I'm not having fun anymore. I nodded. Yeah, I guess so. We've got some good pics anyway. But you know what? I'm going to say something to that weird fuck. Kyle didn't respond. Instead, his eyes widened, mouth hanging open in pure, abject fear. Kyle? I asked. My brother yelled out, but not to answer me. Tammy! I turned to face my friend, who stood behind me, and saw it. Him. The Easter bunny. He'd left his seat during our brief conversation and evidently had somehow silently snuck behind Tammy. I hadn't realized how tall the man was as he sat in that white seat. It didn't look natural, now seeing him upright. He had to be over 7 feet tall, towering over the three of us. Arms spread open wide as if he were about to grab her in a big bear hug. But he didn't. As Tammy turned to look behind her, the Easter bunny swung his hands together, a motion of two clashing cymbals. As his hands met, Tammy's head was crushed between them, effortlessly as if it were a rotten peach. The Easter bunny's blue suit was coated in a massive spray of vicious red gore, some of which was splashed backwards onto Kyle and I. The two of us were speechless, mouths agape in horror. The bunny stood there for a few moments, hands clasped together above Tammy's neckline, her convulsing body still standing upright. Finally, he drew them apart, and for a brief moment we could see the pancake-flat scrap of ruined flesh that Tammy's head had been reduced to as she collapsed to the floor. I was frozen with fear, my feet locked in place. My roommate's skull had just been flattened by a freakish man in an Easter bunny costume. The bunny began to speak as he pointed a dripping red finger at me, glove saturated with Tammy's viscera. You two should come back. Come to the place between the walls and live here forever. His soft voice was tinny and strange. Hollow. The only way to describe it is that it sounded like he was speaking from somewhere else. Some faraway place like the voice wasn't even coming from the suit. "You never should have left. I should have grabbed you back then." I snapped out of it, turning toward my brother. His face was completely drained of colour, and he poked his fingers around at the bits of Tammy's gore that covered his nose and lips. "Kyle!" I grabbed his arm harshly. "We have to go. Come on now." I clumsily ran my free hand over my face, trying to wipe away Tammy's wet bits. I physically pulled my brother and began running, turning to see that the bunny wasn't following. But he just stood in place and kept that finger pointed squarely in my direction. As we turned and rushed down the long corridor with Kyle still in a daze, something else was immediately wrong. The corridor leading from Wing D back to the main entryway had previously been short, a brief walk, but I noticed it quickly as we sprinted past the shuttered storefronts and fast enough that we should have already reached the dry fountain. But the fountain was nowhere to be seen, and instead we were simply surrounded by nameless and empty shops. Turning to look behind me, the food court and the bunny and Tammy's mutilated corpse were out of our line of vision. It was impossible. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever in both directions. No end in sight. "Kyle!" I shook my brother, trying to rouse him. "Kyle! Something's wrong!" But he just stared at me, wide-eyed. "I know," he said meekly. "Tammy." I fought back tears as I cupped Kyle's face with both hands. "We need to figure this out, Kyle. Something's wrong. We can't leave." He looked back and forth exasperatedly, glancing down both ends of the now infinite corridor. He turned to me with a look of pure terror. "I'm going to try and call 911, I said, pulling out my phone. But it wouldn't turn on. The screen remained black no matter which buttons I pressed. And Kyle's was the same. I threw my hands up in frustration. "What the fuck?" I exclaimed. "What the fuck is going on?" Kyle shook his head back and forth, tears in his eyes. Suddenly, in the distance, I heard footsteps rapidly approaching. From the way we'd come before, from where the Easter bunny was. Kyle and I shared a panicked look and immediately began sprinting again, forward into the endless hallway. I was starting to feel a stitch in my side, and Kyle looked breathless as we passed a familiar sight. Picton's pallet sales. In this nightmare world where we'd ended up, there the so-called antique store stood, door wide open. "Go!" I commanded, and Kyle listened. We rushed into the store and I fought to pull the glass door closed behind me. Toward the back of the store, a lone employee stood still behind the till, keeping a silent vigil. We rushed toward the person, screaming that we needed help. We came to a dead stop as we approached the register. Sitting behind the cash wrap, manning the till, it wasn't a person. I don't know what you call it. The thing had jet black skin, its eyes gigantic white orbs and stretched open wide with pinprick pupils. It had no visible ears or nostrils and appeared to be completely naked. Its mouth was a jagged slit that almost looked torn into its inky flesh. "Oh, what the fuck?" Kyle stammered. The thing stared at us and began frantically shaking its head. The flaps of skin on its face rippled as a voice escaped the creature's throat. Our dad's voice. "Look, Joe, things between your mum and I haven't been great." It was a pitch-perfect imitation. Hell, it almost sounded like an audio recording. And it was the last conversation I'd ever had with my father. "You and Kyle are the most important things in my life. It's just hard for me to be around your mum sometimes." I shook my head in disbelief, and Kyle seemed downright catatonic, collapsing to the floor and hugging his knees to his chest. But before I could fully process what was happening in front of me, I heard the glass entryway of the Picton's pallet sale shatter and footsteps crunching over glass. The Easter Bunny was here. Tears streamed down my face as I turned to see the baby blue figure slowly meander towards us under the store's dim lights, and still daintily holding the wicker basket full of plastic Easter eggs around his wrist. Without even thinking, I grabbed an object off of one of the pallets full of junk nearest to me, an aluminum baseball bat with a $3 price tag, and swung it high at the bunny's head as he approached. I was surprised to feel virtually no give as the costume's head went flying and knocked clean off the tall blue shoulders. Underneath was nothing. No coal-skinned monster, no freakish homeless pervert, just nothing. Thin air. I dropped the bat in disbelief, gawking at the now headless being that stood in front of me. "Oh God," Kyle murmured in shock as he turned to observe the horrible sight. The headless bunny suddenly lurched down and forward, so that the empty, naked neck hole faced me. It then raised its arms and stretching them toward me. As I stared into the circular abyss, a void so deep it couldn't have been of this world, all I could think of was the hollow emptiness of this entire place. How it felt to walk through those doors and knowing that everything we loved about the mall was gone. With a grinding, snapping noise, a ring of square yellow teeth emerged around the inside of the costume's neck hole. But not a neck hole, but a mouth. The soft voice came forward again, drifting from that empty hole and not sounding so far away anymore. "This is what's right," the thing said. "This is where you need to be." Suddenly, the massive creature shot forward and engulfed my arm in its maw. I gasped, trying to free myself as I felt a cold, numbing burn. I screamed as the strange tingling turned to outright pain, beating the blue-furred body with my fists and trying desperately to kick the thing off. And all the while, my father's voice droned out from the thing behind the cash register. Suddenly, I was knocked loose from the thing's grasp. I fell to the floor and saw Kyle standing where I had been moments ago. My brother had regained enough of his senses to stand and push me out of the thing's grip. He'd saved me. Of course, with this action, he'd planted himself directly in front of the creature. I made to extend my arm down to the floor and push myself up, but a sudden panic surged through me as I realized I couldn't feel anything below my right shoulder. I looked down to see that my arm was gone. It almost looked like it had never been there to begin with. There was no blood, no wound, just a smooth lump of flesh that cut off when my elbow should have started. Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, I repetitively murmured to myself as I ran my hand over the unnaturally smooth nub. I felt my mind starting to slip. It was all too much. "Joe!" Kyle cried out but was cut short, and I knew what I would see when I turned back to face them. The creature grabbed my brother by the shoulders with its unnatural strength, and I heard something crack as its gloved hands tightened. "You'll do." The Easter Bunny extended its gaping mouth over Kyle's head. It was devouring my brother from the top down, like a cobra. I put my hand over my mouth to stifle a cry. "Kyle," I whispered. My little brother's body convulsed rapidly as the thing consumed him, slowly working its way down, the stinking fluid dropping to the floor. I knew that this was my only chance. I hate myself for it every single day of my miserable life. But I stood, and I ran. Tears streaming from my eyes, I ran toward the entrance of the store. I looked back one last time. I had to. I took that one final glance backward, just in time to see the bottoms of Kyle's shoes disappearing into that gaping maw. I snapped my head back forward quickly and exited the shop to the sound of my father's voice still calling out to me. "Come back, Joe. Josephine! Please, I miss you, baby." I realized quickly that the mall had changed again. It was no longer an endless corridor of nothing, no longer some alien world. Though everything looked even more rundown and dilapidated than before. Most of the stores were boarded up, trash littered the ground and graffiti on the walls. This didn't seem quite right either. But in the distance I saw the fountain, and in turn I saw the exit. I pumped my legs, subconsciously gripping at the smooth stump of my arm with my remaining hand. I burst out the main doors and collapsed in a heap, withdrawing my phone to try and call 911 as fast as I could, to try and save my brother. But I knew it was too late. The police arrived quickly, but they didn't find anything. No bodies. Not Tammy, not my brother. And they sure as hell didn't find an otherworldly creature that looked like the Easter Bunny. But they knew that something strange had happened that day. My missing friend, missing brother, and missing arm were evidence of that. But the story, of course, just didn't add up. Why would an Easter photo display be set up in a mall that had been shut down for over a year? Because see, the Granite Path Mall wasn't dying. It wasn't on its last legs. It had been completely closed. Empty. Abandoned. No one should have been there. No employees, no Easter bunnies. Nothing. Naturally, I spent a long time in an institution, for no one believed my story. And why would they? My mum never forgave me. She supported me and helped me through living with my new disability, cared for me in those early months and years of my total mental collapse. But at the end of the day, she thought I was keeping the real story from her, whether intentionally or not. The story of where her son had gone. The picture I'd taken that day of Kyle didn't show an Easter display or a costumed man. It just showed my brother posing awkwardly in the middle of the dilapidated and desolate interior of an abandoned mall. Every picture was like that, showing storefronts and tiled floors that were much more run down and ruined than they had actually looked in the moment. We had gone somewhere that we shouldn't have, and something was waiting to greet us when we arrived. No amount of drugs or doctors or anything could divorce me from the reality of what had happened. My missing arm was proof enough. Something had come to exist in that empty place. Or maybe it had always been there, waiting for its chance to roam free. But we had entered its world, so it had eaten my arm and eaten my brother. Those beautiful memories of the mall, a carefree childhood with my dad and brother, well, they were tainted long before that day. Trying to recapture them, even for a fleeting moment, twisted us into something somewhere that didn't want to let us go. I think about Kyle and Tammy every single day. I feel them when that familiar cold burn creeps down my phantom limb. I loved my brother more than anything else in the world, and it was my fault that he was gone. I know that someday when I close my eyes to sleep, I shall open them and be there again. Inside the Granite Path Mall, in those long endless corridors, and face to face with a fuzzy blue Easter bunny in yellow overalls. And when he pulls off his head, there won't be nothing. There will be Kyle. There will be my brother's loving face. But wrong. Made into something else by his time there in that abandoned world with a thing that looked like the Easter bunny. But I'll stay there with him, in the place between the walls, the place where I need to be. I know this, and not only because I deserve it for leaving my brother there that day. No, I know this because some nights I feel Kyle's hand squeeze the phantom hand of my missing arm so tight, so desperate and hopeless and scared. I know that wherever Kyle is, is cold and lonely and dark, so far away. And I try with everything inside of me to squeeze back. I need to get this off my chest. Hello, my name is Bishop. I live in rural Kentucky with my parents, uncle and 3 cousins, or what's left of them anyway. Before we get to that, however, I need to tell you what I can remember from my childhood. It was Easter morning, the rain's dew over the meadow and fog over the woods. It was a fairly nice day, till we heard the scream. It came from the woods just beyond the shed on our property. We were eating breakfast, just going about our business, when my Uncle Jim crashed into the kitchen with a shotgun in his hand. He looked like he just saw a ghost. "Terrence, you gotta look at this." He was puffy. Of course, being a 7-year-old boy, I decided to go along as well. First, my mother pleaded, but my dad insisted it would be fine. I wish I just stayed in the damn house. As we neared the source of the scream, all we heard was chewing. The cracking of bones and the tearing of flesh. If you could hear it, it was hell. Just to put it in perspective, if you were to put a living mouse, no rat, into a meat grinder, it would make a noise not even close to what we heard. We saw a trail of blood coming from a cornfield going to the woods. My Uncle Jim readied his shotgun. My dad pulled out a knife and gave it to me, grabbing a sledgehammer from a box near the woods. But the sledge already had blood on it. This made all of us flow with adrenaline. It was kill or be killed. As we walked into the woods, we saw the damn thing eating into a little girl's face. But it wasn't just any little girl. It was my cousin. This infuriated my uncle, who was always nice and chill about 100% of the time, but now he was screaming words and curses I dare not say. To this day, I still don't know what some of them mean. I don't even want to know. Not after what happened to my uncle. Anyway, this thing was eating my cousin's face. My uncle shot around at it, but it bounced away on its legs. My cousin had an egg basket ready. It spilled over, and in the eggs, my God, in the eggs were tiny little dead chicks. Bits of red and yellow were everywhere. This drove my uncle mad. He threw himself into a train yesterday, not even enough to bury. I'm 26 now, and it's my daughter's first Easter. Well, one she can celebrate. She was born with a birth defect that was also found in my DNA, but enough of that. She's a 4-year-old little girl, and her mother decided on throwing her an Easter party. I agreed, as long as they're careful around Alexa. I saw the damn bunny. This time I got a good look at it. It was 7 feet tall. It was pink and red and purple, like it was some sort of feral animal. I guess it was. But what scared me is it wasn't a bunny. It was a person. Only the person was dead, its face sewn into the suit. It was the suit. I wondered why my uncle wasn't going to have a funeral. Now I know. The bits and pieces, the suit, the train. It all makes sense. My uncle is the bunny. He's out to kill my daughter. The suit. I wonder how long it will be until I get sewn into one too. The laughter of kids filled the air as Uncle Danny blew the horn for the beginning of the annual Easter egg hunt. Shrieks of younger cousins, nephews and nieces danced in my eardrums as they frolicked about, searching the grass and bushes of my uncle's property for those colourful little eggs. Alas, I had just turned 16 and had finally grown out of those childish habits. The last few years I went along with the little ones' pleas, and I would join them in their hunt. But times had changed and I was more interested in grown-up things like getting to eat at an actual table this year and not some little pull-out poker table that was too short for my teenage body. "So you saw the new changes?" Jacob asked me with an overwhelming hint of sarcasm. Jacob and I got along very well, despite the 3-year age gap. We played a lot of games together online, so when my family made the yearly spring trip up to his house, I was excited to get to talk with him face to face. We were sitting in the living room chatting about one of our favourite games, poring over the buckets of treats that the Easter Bunny had left for us. I finally decided upon a boxed chocolate bunny. Whilst explaining my disdain for a recent game patch, I popped open the cardboard top and turned the box sideways, letting the brown replica slide out into my hand. I looked up at my cousin. "What, you ain't gonna lecture me on ruining my dinner?" Jacob laughed, then waved his hand. "I couldn't give less of a damn, go for it." I chuckled as well, then chomped into the head of the chocolate mass. My teeth broke through its surface immediately, and my heart jumped at the surprise. Guess I didn't see that it was hollow. Cheap companies. Why make a chocolate bunny if you're not gonna... And that's when I hit the liquid. It was gooey and thick, like a maple syrup of some kind, and so I thought it was a filling. But then came the taste. Metallic. After that, the feeling of some stringy fibrous mass getting stuck between my teeth. My brain raced to try and understand the weird collection of textures and tastes that were rushing at me, and when I couldn't, I spit out whatever I already had onto the floor. Meat. Meat and blood were staining my uncle's living room carpet. I stared into that bunny's neck, seeing the dripping crimson ooze coming out. I tried to tell myself that it was just filling, strawberry jam, raspberry, cherry, but the taste only solidified in my mouth the longer it went on, and I was nearly in tears as I came to the truth. "Oh, Peter, no more of that, dinner's ready. You'll spoil your appetite." I whipped my head around to see my Aunt Lindsay standing over me, her arms posed on her hips in the manner adults do when they're upset about something. I pointed to the bunny, trying to explain how horrific the situation was, but I could only sputter as she grabbed my arm and gestured for Jacob to follow. "Oh, come along, you two." "Now, Peter, I know you're 16 this year, which means you get to join us at the adult table. Isn't that nice?" My mouth still struggled to make sounds as Lindsay took us into the dining room, but it quickly gave up trying. A man was strewn out across the table, his thighs in my mother and father's mouths, his arm on my grandmother's plate, and his head and torso naked and burned in the centre of the table. Uncle Danny was cutting into the man's neck with a fork and knife. I watched as he took the piece, placed it on his plate, and then smiled at me. "Petey, come on, have a seat." I couldn't move, so Lindsay did that part for me. She seated me down across from my father, and Jacob sat to my left as Danny cut him a piece too. When the meat landed upon my plate, I was paralysed in disgust and horror. It took every ounce of me not to puke there and then at the table. My eyes darted up and down the table, seeing every monster there with their hands clasped together as Danny gave grace. "This is my body, which will be given up for you." I'm sure you all know about the Easter Bunny, the rabbit or a person in a rabbit suit. I was always scared by those costumes, I guess what you'd call them. Mothers would take their children to the mall, buy them a toy and force them onto the creep's lap. His fuzzy arms, radiant eyes, and those long teeth in a never-ending grin. Not to mention you could see the person's eyes right through his gaping hole of a mouth. Oh, and the real man's bloodshot eyes that terrified my little soul to know he was holding me. Once, though, my mother made the mistake of wanting to take too many pictures. It was April 2nd, 1996. Easter was on the 7th this year, and I was 9. My mother dragged me to the mall, me groaning all the way. "Mom, I'm too old for Easter pictures," I whined as we made our way to the centre of our small town shopping mall. "Sweetheart, Mummy promises this is the last year we'll take pictures." She pursed her lips. "But we'll take them again next year if you don't cooperate, and then let them take double the number of pictures." I smiled at this. "Yes, Mummy. I knew the real reason I wouldn't have to take them is because my mother was pregnant with twins. A girl and a boy. Their names were to be Elizabeth and Eli. My name was Evelyn, so she kind of had an E-name going. Once we made it to the carrot patch, as the staff would call it, my heart sunk. This rabbit was different, almost sinister. It had dark brown fur, beady red eyes, and an unusually large smile. The scariest thing of all, though, was you couldn't see the person inside. As scary as I found that knowing a person inside a rabbit suit was what I was sitting on, not knowing what the person's face inside looked like was unnerving. But I wasn't to resist due to not wanting to take any pictures next year. We waited around 20 minutes in a line ridiculously long. I was next in line, and I was calm until I heard a blood-curdling scream come from the boy in front of me. I knew him. He was 9 as well. His name was James Russell. He was the toughest boy I knew. That is why this made me extremely anxious. What was happening? Did the rabbit bite him? My 9-year-old mind raced. His mother left the scene, her crying little boy trotting along behind her. She looked embarrassed. I walked slowly to the evil rabbit. I made direct eye contact and stopped dead in my tracks. His eyes looked real. I stared deeply into his oval eyes. My mind raced. I was snapped out of my trance by my mother tapping me on the shoulder. "Darling, are you all right?" Was I? I wanted to scream and cry and hug her tightly. Instead, I nodded and smiled, running off to sit on the rabbit's lap. Something felt off about this. Other than the costume's evil look, his lap felt soft, like a real rabbit's fur. The woman snapped a few pictures and I started to feel dizzy. I tried speaking, but my lips were glued shut. I was almost asleep when I heard screams and cries. I felt someone pick me up and start running with me in their arms, their skin softer than silk. I knew it was my mother. I never felt another human with such soft skin. I woke up in my bed hours, maybe days later, extremely hungry. It was around noon on the clock. So I made my way downstairs to ask my mother for a snack. I found her watching television. It was the news. I quietly crept behind to watch. The man was older. He was friends with my grandfather. The presenter stated, "In other news, a terrible tragedy had happened. 6 children were murdered and 4 were injured when the Easter Bunny at West Side Mall started eating children alive," the man said in a grisly voice. My heart stopped. Eating children alive? I suddenly lost my appetite and headed to my room. Before I could make my way all the way up the stairs, I heard from the TV, "Be on the lookout, citizens of Pinewood Oaks. The killer is still on the loose." That sentence was enough to send me flying up to my bed, and I cried myself into a dreamless sleep. At around 2:30 a.m, I heard a tapping on my window. I figured it was a small TV playing the Gilmore Girls, so I tried drifting back off to sleep. This time I heard a chuckle, and not a woman's chuckle, and not a chuckle on the TV, but a chuckle outside my window. I was a brave 9-year-old, so I crawled out of bed and slowly crept over to my window. I pulled back the curtain, and what I saw was unbelievable. It was letters written in blood. "Mummy can't save you this time," it read. That was 22 years ago. I'm 31 now and I'm still scared of more Easter bunnies. The scariest part is that the monster is still roaming the streets and looking for victims to eat. So I've told this story to family and friends and usually get laughed off each time, but here goes. I believe the Easter Bunny is real. When I was younger, around 2nd grade, my mother was deployed to Afghanistan, as she was in the military at the time, and so I went to stay with my cousins and my aunt in Minnesota. I usually spent my childhood summers there, so it was a no-brainer while my mum was deployed. Anyway, fast forward to Easter and let me paint a picture of the house layout so you can understand my perspective. While staying with my aunt, we renovated the business room, aka the room with the computer, into a bedroom for me. This room led to the kitchen and also had a door leading to the hallway, which in turn led to a bathroom and my cousin's bedrooms on the other wall. My bed was on one side, the right side of the wall, and if laying in bed, I can see the left door leading to the kitchen, and then behind me is the door that leads to the hallway. Anyway, I woke up on Easter morning around 2:45, if not around 3 o'clock, and could not get back to bed for whatever reason. About 15 minutes went by, and all of a sudden I heard a loud thump in the hallway behind me. It sounded like something or someone appeared. And then I heard almost non-human or childlike laughter behind me. I distinctly remember trying to say something or look back, but I was literally unable to. This was not fear-driven, and I believe this entity did not allow me to turn. The giggling persisted for another few seconds, and then the voice and the entity trailed off. It literally sounded like it was hopping away. I stayed in bed and under the covers for probably a good 20 minutes and then bolted downstairs to sleep on the floor of my aunt's bedroom. Both her and my uncle were hard asleep snoring and had no idea what I was talking about at 3 in the morning. I was not on drugs and have never been prescribed any medications. I'm convinced that this was either the Easter Bunny or a spirit that appeared during the witching hour. Not sure if this was the appropriate place for this, but this experience was so strange and walks the line between reality and impossibility for me. So for the last 15 plus years, I've been freaked out by this memory I have from childhood. I'm 30 now and it still feels totally real, but the rational side of my mind has forced me to reconcile it as a strange, vivid dream. The memory is from when I was a young child, possibly 5 or 6 years old. My parents divorced right about that age, and in this memory, they're still together. Here is the context. It was Easter, or very close to it at least. My family owns 40 acres of land in the Catskills. I spent countless weekends up there through my life, and in this memory, most of my close family was up for the holiday. It was tradition to hide the children's Easter baskets and have the kids find them instead of eggs. So the dream begins with it being Easter morning. The log cabin currently on the property wasn't built at the time, but we had a 2-car engine with a wood stove and a small camper. It was chilly that morning and still early spring in upstate New York. My brother and I split up to search for our Easter baskets in the woods. I remember walking around the woods surrounding the garage and wondering where my basket would be. Just how far into the woods would my parents have placed it? My grandfather always smoked a pipe, and as I ventured deeper down into the trail, I smelled a pretty familiar scent. I remember thinking, how did Pop Pop get down here already? I was getting closer as the scent was getting stronger. And just then, I saw something I'll never be able to get out of my mind. A humanoid rabbit resting against a tree 20 yards in front of me. It turned its head and looked right at me. All I felt was pure terror. I stared for a few seconds and turned around and ran for my life. I ran back to the garage in the safety of my parents. I remember crying hysterically and told my father what I had seen. I remember my family surrounding me and calming me down while telling me I had imagined it and everything was okay. The memory fades from there. I don't remember the aftermath. Still, 25 plus years later, I still have that image seared into my mind and cannot shake it. As I stated, the logical part of my mind has tried to convince itself that it was nothing more than a vivid dream or nightmare. But it's always there lurking, and no matter how much time passes, I cannot seem to 100% convince myself that it was nothing more than the imagination of a 5-year-old. Hello everyone. I've been waiting to post this story for a while. Anxiety has stopped it until now, so here goes. When I was around 6 to 8, I lived in a tiny town in the coastal mountains. It was just my young parents and myself living in a double-wide trailer. Someone was kind enough to let us move onto their property, and it was beautiful. There was horses on the property too, which is another story. Anyway, after putting out carrots and water for the Easter bunny, I went to bed, which was the first room when you walked down the hallway from a large living room. I prayed and prayed so hard that I would meet the Easter bunny. I wanted him to be real so bad. I had made the same prayer every Easter for years. The next thing I know, I'm asleep. It's weird because I can see it now. I remember having a small rectangle room, and my bed was on the opposite side of the room, diagonal to the door. As I was deep in dreamland, I was woken up by the sound of my door opening. I stayed still and pinched my arm to see if I was in a nightmare. It worked and I felt pain. So hoping I was awake and thinking it was my parents, I pretended to be asleep. The footsteps I heard didn't sound like them. So I tried to slowly slink lower under my blankets while seeming asleep. My bed was a twin with a wooden frame with drawers at the bottom and a headboard that had 2 sliding doors for a cabinet storage. The steps stopped about a foot away from the head of my bed. That's when I heard, on my headboard. I slowly look up, still trying to act like I'm sleeping, but I'm fucking terrified. I can just about see a large glowing white fuzzy fingertip. The taps got louder and sounded impatient or angry. I shut my eyes and silently prayed for protection. I'm not sure how long it was, but it seemed like forever until I heard my door shut. Slowly looking toward my door, I saw nothing. I was relieved but still wanted comfort. Still afraid to leave my super protective blankets, I surrounded myself with as many stuffed animals as I could reach without leaving my bed. I'm not sure if I was just so exhausted from it all, or maybe it was my body just tired from a very active imagination, but I must have passed out. The next thing I know, I'm under my mountain of studies being woken up for school by my mum. Please, if you can all help and let me know if this seems like a dream or maybe some strange alien phantom monster thing. I don't know, but I've never forgotten that night. Yeah. It still freaks me out when I think about it. Did I know something was wrong the moment I woke up that Easter morning? Looking back, I think I did, even if I didn't know exactly what it was that had made my eyes snap open. There was no reason for me to be awake, I remember thinking. The sun had barely come up, filling the house with the hushed golden light of dawn. I tiptoed down the hallway, hoping to avoid waking up my parents and breaking the spell. There was a tension in the air, a kind of anticipation that I couldn't explain, well, not at first. I had already made my way down the stairs when I remembered. It was Easter Sunday. The Easter bunny was coming. I was 7 years old that fateful April morning, and every Easter I could remember so far had featured a hunt for colourful candy-filled eggs, and now that I'd woken up early, I might even get to see the Easter bunny for myself. I was still wondering if I'd get in trouble for peeking out the window when I heard a knock at the door. Even though my heart was pounding with excitement, the sudden sound still scared me, and I felt the shadow of a doubt cross my mind before I unlocked the door. Who would visit our house at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning? Had something bad happened? When I pulled on the heavy brass handle, however, I let out a sigh of relief. Everything was fine. It was just the Easter Bunny. The man-sized, floppy-eared, fur-covered figure stood on the porch holding a wicker basket. Wow, I muttered to myself. Are you for real? Some of the kids in class say you don't even exist, you know. The Easter Bunny did not respond. As if to confirm my suspicions, I reached out and stroked his fur. It felt sort of fake, like the mascots at Chuck E. Cheese's. The tall figure didn't budge and didn't react to my touch at all. It just stared down at me with these enormous unblinking plastic eyes. Then it gestured to the basket. A scroll-like note lay on the minty plastic grass and tied with a bright yellow ribbon. A grin spread across my face as I unraveled it and read the fancy handwritten letters it contained. You've been chosen for a special Easter egg hunt. Me? I pointed to my chest, eyes wide. The Easter Bunny nodded. Well, I frowned. I better ask my parents. The tall furry figure had slammed shut the front door to my house with a single powerful paw. I gulped. I hadn't wanted to make the Easter Bunny angry, especially now I realized just how big it was. The foggy streets were silent, not even a bird sang. It was like the whole world was empty, except for me and the Easter Bunny. I tried to swallow again, but my throat was dry. I looked up at the black windows of my parents' bedroom. If I woke them now, I'd get in trouble for sneaking downstairs, for being outside, and for spying on the Easter Bunny. Who could even guess how long I'd be grounded for? Meanwhile, if I had just went on one quick Easter egg hunt, I could be back before they even knew I was gone. Besides, I'd been chosen. Who knew what special things the Easter Bunny had in store for me? I shivered. The morning mist was cold and there was something unnerving about the way the Easter Bunny kept staring at me. Okay, I shrugged. Let's go. And the Easter Bunny led me away across the dewy grass. The fog was so thick I could barely see anything apart from the sea of bright green around us and the Easter Bunny's tail bobbing ahead of me like a will-o'-the-wisp. I had a feeling I knew where we were, however. The enormous lawn of the nursing home behind my parents' house. I even thought I could see its lights on the hill to the right and make out the dark shapes of pine trees beyond that. Then, suddenly, the Easter Bunny stopped and set down the basket. It still hadn't spoken a word. Instead, it pointed at the ground straight ahead. It was time for me to start searching. The fog had lifted a bit and the dew felt good on my bare feet, but it was kind of unnerving how the Easter Bunny kept following so close behind me, like a silent giant. When I found the first egg, however, my doubts vanished. It was pink plastic, just like I was used to, and inside was a shiny golden ring. My jaw dropped at the sight of how it glittered in the early morning light. Is this real gold? I gasped. The Easter Bunny nodded. Is it for me? The big furry figure nodded again. I slipped the heavy golden thing around my finger, careful not to let it fall, and went in search of the next egg. I couldn't help but get distracted by the ring as I walked. The more I looked at it, the more something about it seemed familiar. Though the sight of a blue plastic egg, badly hidden beside a stream up ahead, soon chased the thought out of my mind. If the last egg had contained a golden ring, what might be inside of this one? Though my yelp of joy died in my throat when I cracked it open. The blue egg only held a dog biscuit, the exact same brand I usually gave to the family golden retriever called Rolf. And speaking of Rolf, I hadn't seen or heard him at all when I woke up, even though he usually barked his head off at every little sound. Okay. I forced myself to smile up at the Easter Bunny, The same smile I reserved for my aunt when she gave me clothes that smelled like mothballs for Christmas. With the gold ring still heavy on my small hand, I slipped the treat into my pocket and went looking for more eggs. The third one I found was bigger than the other two. It was bright yellow with blue dots, almost impossible to miss, and it was located on the edge of the pine forest. In fact, all of the eggs that the Easter Bunny had left for me seemed to be leading me in that direction, away from the lights of my neighborhood and toward the darkness of the woods. I thought of the breadcrumb trail from Hansel and Gretel, remembered the horrible old witch in her candy cabin, and shuddered. My parents had told me never to go into the woods alone, but I was with the Easter Bunny, so it had to be all right. And anyway, I wanted to find out what was inside that big egg. This time, however, I recognized the contents right away. These are my father's glasses, I muttered. What are they doing here? Of course, the Easter Bunny did not answer. I couldn't help but imagine the huge furry figure in front of me climbing onto the roof of my house, silently sliding open my parents' bedroom window, sneaking inside and grabbing the glasses from my father's bedside table. But why would the Easter Bunny do such a thing? My father was as blind as a bat without the wireframe glasses that I was currently holding in my hands. A sense of foreboding crept into my bones. Another egg, a purple one this time, sparkled beside a mossy stone just inside the forest, but I realized I didn't want to go after it. The sun was higher in the sky now, the mist was almost gone. I could see the nursing home clearly up on the hill and hear the sounds of birds and car tires from the comforting confines of my neighborhood. That world, the world of family breakfasts and the bright yellow school buses, the world without the Easter Bunny, suddenly felt very far away. I don't think I want to play anymore, I muttered in a small voice. The Easter Bunny's ears flopped as it bent its head to the side, a gesture that was comical and hostile at the same time. There was nowhere to hide from the black centers of its unblinking plastic eyes. Suddenly, and with surprising violence, it stabbed its paw toward the heart of the forest. It shuffled its furry feet towards me menacingly, urging me on toward the woods. I bit my lip and started walking toward the purple egg. The Easter Bunny's furry grey feet crunched over the pine needles. It was following closer and closer behind me. Full of misgivings, I stopped to open the purple egg. When I did, something round, slick and crimson slid into my hand. I dropped it with a yelp of horror. It was a real human finger. There was something about it I recognized too. My mother's nail polish. Suddenly, I realized where the gold ring had come from. I was wearing my parents' wedding band. I gasped and took a step backward. The woods felt vast and dark indeed. What's going on? I felt tears welling up in the corner of my eyes. I want to go home. I want to see my mum and dad. The Easter Bunny's paw shot down and grabbed my wrist. It was dragging me deeper into the forest. I yelled and squirmed, but another mitt of fake fur clamped down over my mouth. It didn't smell like springtime or candy. Its odor was sour, rotten, and wrong. Up ahead was another egg, a bright orange one now, laying among some dead pine branches. I don't want to, I mumbled through the fur. But the Easter Bunny forced my hand down onto the cheap plastic. Part of me was afraid to open it. The other part was filled with morbid curiosity, a sick need to know what was inside. Something round and whitish red rolled out with a splat. Pine needles stuck to its white, veiny surface, and a foul white liquid oozed from where it had been ruptured. My father's bright blue eye stared up at me from the forest floor. Why are you doing this? I screamed at the Easter Bunny. This deep in the woods, it was so dark that the morning still felt like night. Even so, I could make out other colourful shapes glimmering in the gloom. More eggs. I had no desire to know what awful secrets they contained. The Easter Bunny tugged insistently on my wrist. It was so big, so strong. How could I ever get away from it? Or was I going to spend what was left of my life searching these shadowy woods for those terrible plastic eggs? I forced myself to start walking toward the nearest egg. There was no sound but the snap of sticks beneath my feet and the wheezing, excited breaths of the giant furry thing beside me. Now that I wasn't struggling against it, the Easter Bunny had loosened its grip somewhat. Furthermore, I realized that its huge paw wasn't very bendable. It couldn't quite close around my scrawny 7-year-old wrist in quite the same way that a human hand could. That gave me an idea. The Easter Bunny was big, the Easter Bunny was strong, and the Easter Bunny was terrifying. But was it fast? My arm was slick with sweat, and when I ripped it out from the Easter Bunny's grip, the furry monstrosity's gasp of surprise and anger seemed to echo through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned, dodging through narrow gaps between the trees and slipping through the undergrowth where I hoped my nightmarish pursuer could not follow. There was no turning back now. I didn't want to think what it would do to me if it dared get a hold of me again. I might even end up inside a few of those colourful plastic eggs. The heavy thump-thump of its footfalls behind me reverberated against the forest floor. It was catching up. The bright lawn beyond the trees grew closer and closer with every step. Then suddenly I was through, bursting out into the dewy grass and sunlight, but not before I felt a furry paw graze the back of my neck. I didn't stop running until I was on the patio of the nursing home at the edge of the neighborhood. The old folks in their wicker chairs observed me cautiously as I stared down at the edge of the forest, where I could barely make out a man-sized shape with floppy bunny ears watching me from within the shadow of the trees. The nurse who I told my story to probably didn't believe or understand a word of it, but he could tell from my thorn-ripped clothing and dirty tear-stained face that something was very wrong. The police met me on the nursing home porch, and when I showed them the way back to my house, it was the 2 officers who found the grisly scene waiting inside. According to the medical examiner, the rest of my family had already been dead for hours when I woke up that Sunday morning. At first, the officers struggled not to laugh when I cried out that the Easter Bunny had got them. Of course, that was before people started opening those strange plastic eggs that had appeared in the woods. Now, 13 years later, and the case is still unsolved. I went to live with my aunt several states away, and she worked hard to protect me from the grim memory of what had happened. To this day, I still don't know what I met on my front porch on that foggy Easter morning. A serial killer in a fursuit? Some kind of supernatural being? I have no idea. All I know is the warning that I plan to pass on to my own children. If the Easter Bunny invites you on an egg hunt, do not go.